I remember the exact moment he walked into my office. His tie was loose, his eyes red, and his whole posture screamed defeat. At first, I thought someone in his family had died. I closed my laptop mid-email and stood up, worried. "Are you okay?" I asked. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he sat down in the chair across from my desk, like his knees could no longer support him. "Rachel," he began, "I wouldn't be here if I had any other choice." The way he said my name, soft, desperate, made my stomach twist. This was my boss, a man I'd worked under for 4 years, a man who had coached me, given me confidence when I was new and scared, praised me when I stayed late, stayed loyal. He was the reason I believed I was on track for something bigger. And now, he looked like a shell of that person. He told me his marriage was hanging by a thread. His wife had caught messages. Flirtatious ones, yes, but nothing physical, he insisted. Still, she was ready to leave him, to take the kids, to file for divorce, and he just couldn't let that happen, not now. He started to cry, real tears. He said he'd gone to therapy, to church, even to his wife's parents to try and talk her down. But nothing worked. And now she wanted proof that he was all in, that he was willing to sacrifice, that he was serious. She wants me to put down a deposit for couples rehab. It's a program in Arizona, $20,000, 0 cents up front. She said if I do this, we can try again. That's all I want, just a chance to try again. I was stunned and confused. Why me? Why not the company? Why not his friends or his family? But I didn't even have time to voice the questions before he answered them. I can't go to HR, they'll think I'm unstable, and I can't go to my family, they're done with me. I've made too many mistakes. But you know I'm not a bad guy. You've seen me day in, day out, you know who I am. And then he said the words I'll never forget. I'll pay you back in 2 paychecks. 3, max. I swear on my kids. I wish I could say I paused to think it through, that I ran the numbers, that I called my accountant, that I slept on it, but I didn't. I saw a man begging for help, and my empathy kicked in before my logic could stop it. I thought of all the times he'd had my back, like when I missed that deadline and he smoothed it over with the client, or when he personally vouched for me during promotion reviews. I'd trusted him with my career. Why not with this? I told him I'd think about it overnight, but by the time he left my office, I already knew I was going to say yes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I looked up the rehab center. Yes, it existed, and yes, it cost a fortune. I imagined his wife, desperate and betrayed, trying to protect their children, needing proof that he still cared. It all made sense. It all sounded heartbreakingly real. And if I could help, then maybe I should. After all, $20,000, 0 cents was a lot, but I had it. Not because I was rich, but because I'd been saving for years. I was hoping to use that money for a down payment on a condo next year, but homes could wait. A family's survival couldn't. The next morning, I wired the money to the account he gave me. He texted me an hour later. "You saved my life. Literally. I'll never forget this, Rachel, I swear." For a moment, I felt good. Not just good. I felt proud, like I had done something that mattered. I told myself that if karma was real, it was going to come back around someday. And for the rest of the week, I walked through the office feeling like I'd done the right thing, like I was part of something bigger than just deadlines and spreadsheets. And then, a week later, as I scrolled through Instagram during my lunch break, I saw it. A girl I didn't recognize, blonde, early 20s, too much makeup and not enough clothing, posing next to a brand new Tesla Model Y. White chrome trim, showroom plate. The caption read, "He said I deserved the best, my first Tesla, baby." I clicked on her profile. It was public, and my jaw clenched when I saw the next post. The same Tesla, parked in front of a luxury apartment complex downtown. The man behind the camera, holding the keys out to her like a prize, was my boss. Same suit, same watch, same lying son of a bitch. My face went cold. My hands went numb, and for a few seconds, all I could hear was the sound of blood rushing through my ears. Because that car, it wasn't just a gift. It was a betrayal bought and paid for with my money. $20,000, 0 cents to save his marriage? No, it was $20, 0 cents to impress his mistress. And I knew, right then, this wasn't over, not even close. I must have stared at that photo for 5 full minutes, trying to convince myself it wasn't him. The lighting wasn't perfect. His face wasn't entirely visible, just a profile, a smile, a glimpse of his signature titanium watch and that expensive gray suit I'd seen him wear to executive meetings. I zoomed in. The watch, no doubt, the way he stood, the slight forward tilt of his head, even the laugh lines that crept up his cheek. It was him. There was no mistaking it, and if that somehow hadn't been enough, the next post sealed it. The caption was short, cocky, and nauseating. "She deserves the world, even if I had to lie for it." The words slammed into me like a punch. I felt dizzy, sick, and so stupid. I refreshed her profile, scrolling back through her previous posts. And there he was again, 3 weeks earlier, sitting across from her at a wine bar I'd recommended to him. I remembered the day I casually told him about it in the break room, saying it was a good place for couples who needed quiet and intimacy, so he took her there, used my words, my trust, my money. I felt the floor fall out from under me as realization hit. He never planned to pay me back. There was no couples rehab, no attempt to fix his marriage. The story he fed me, the tears, the desperation, it was all theater. I had funded his affair. The worst part wasn't just the betrayal. It was how easily he had manipulated me. I prided myself on being sharp, independent, not the kind of woman who got taken for a ride. I'd clawed my way through a male-dominated department, built my career from the ground up, and still managed to be decent, kind, and fair to the people around me. And here I was, blindsided like a naive intern on her first week. I didn't cry. Not right away. Instead, I shut my phone, stood up, and walked back to my desk like a ghost. I finished out the workday in silence, answering emails, attending 2 Zoom meetings, and watching him from across the office as he laughed and smiled with clients like nothing had happened. Like I was invisible. Like my $20,000 didn't exist. That night I sat on my couch in total silence. No TV, no music, just the hum of my refrigerator and the occasional creak of my upstairs neighbor's footsteps. I kept thinking about the way he looked at me when I handed him that money. The fake gratitude, the forced humility, the trembling voice. It was all performance, and I had bought a front row ticket. I opened my banking app and stared at the outgoing transfer. $20,000, 0 cents. My name on the sender line, his name on the recipient, labeled loan, urgent, family matter. I scrolled up through our text exchange, the thank you messages, the promise to repay me by the 15th, the double pinky swear. I had never felt more humiliated in my life. But humiliation has a strange way of sharpening the senses. I didn't want pity. I didn't even want an apology. I wanted to make it right. Or, more accurately, I wanted him to feel what I felt, betrayed, used, disposable. I wanted justice, and I didn't care anymore about playing it safe. So I started small. I made a burner Instagram account and followed her. Her name was Cassidy, and she wasn't shy. Her entire feed was a living scrapbook of indulgence, designer bags, spa days, luxury dinners, and now a Tesla Model Y. It wasn't just any Tesla either. It was custom-ordered, pearl white, black interior sport wheels, full self-driving package. I knew because I cross-checked the specs with Tesla's website and roughly calculated the price. Just under $65,000, 0 cents. And she was tagging him in posts, subtly, of course, just his first initial and a winking emoji. But it didn't take a genius to figure it out. The next day, I walked into the office with a plan forming in my mind. I wasn't ready to go nuclear yet. I needed more proof, more control, more patience. I said good morning to the front desk, got my coffee, and smiled when he passed me in the hallway. "Rachel," he said warmly, like nothing was wrong. I almost laughed. Almost. I sat through our team meeting, nodding at all the right moments, then excused myself for a dentist appointment and went home early. Once there, I opened a spreadsheet and began building a timeline. Date of the loan, date of the Tesla post, the names, the receipts. I pulled emails, calendar invites, work expense reports, anything that might connect the dots. And that's when something interesting popped up. A reimbursement request from him for client gift vehicle deposit dated 3 days after I sent the money. He'd actually tried to funnel the deposit through company funds. The request was denied by accounting, flagged as excessive and unsupported. But it was all there. The timestamp, the amount, the audacity. He was trying to make the company pay for the same car I'd already paid for. That's when I started to feel less like a victim and more like a witness building a case. He wasn't just a cheater, he was reckless. And sloppy. I printed everything. I started a paper file and tucked it inside a folder labeled Personal Legal. Then I called a friend of mine, Lena, who worked in HR at a different firm. I told her the basics, not naming names, just hypotheticals. If someone lent their boss money for personal reasons and then discovered it was used for, let's say, something unethical, and there was evidence of attempted reimbursement from company funds, what should they do? Lena didn't even hesitate. Document everything, build a timeline, and talk to his wife. I froze. His wife? She sighed. Look, Rachel, HR can investigate financial abuse, but if this guy is funneling lies through both his marriage and his office, the person with the most leverage is his spouse. She can blow everything up, and HR won't be able to bury it. It felt risky, it felt dirty, it felt exactly like what he deserved. Later that night, I scrolled through his Facebook. He'd been careful not to post anything personal recently, but I found his wife's page. Her name was Megan. She looked kind, strong, maybe 10 years younger than him, with 2 kids who resembled him so closely it made my stomach turn. Her page was filled with family photos, school fundraisers, and motivational quotes about forgiveness and rebuilding. It made me hesitate, just for a second. Did she deserve to be dragged into this? But then I remembered the caption on Cassidy's post. She deserves the best, even if I had to lie for it. He wasn't just cheating on her, he was mocking her, publicly, shamelessly. I stared at her profile picture for a long time. Then I opened my email, typed in her name, her company, her public business contact, and wrote, "Hi, Megan. I'm sorry to reach out this way, but I think there's something you deserve to know." My finger hovered over the send button. I closed my eyes, and then I clicked. He said he'd pay me back in 2 paychecks. I had just started collecting my interest. It had been 3 days since I sent the email to Megan, and every hour that passed without a response made my nerves fray further. I checked my inbox obsessively, even though I knew she probably wouldn't write back right away. Maybe she was still processing. Maybe she thought I was a liar. Or maybe, just maybe, she already knew. I didn't know what outcome I wanted more. A part of me hoped she would confirm that I wasn't the only one he had fooled. Another part of me hoped she'd never seen this coming because it would prove how deeply he'd managed to deceive everyone around him. While I waited, I stayed busy. It wasn't hard. Corporate life always finds a way to crush your soul through back-to-back meetings and never-ending email chains. But now, everything I did felt a little more calculated, a little more strategic. I started observing him closely again, not as someone I admired, but as a case study. I watched who he talked to, how long his meetings ran, who left his office smiling. I watched his moods, his energy levels, his sudden disappearances from the office in the middle of the day. He was unraveling. Not, obviously, he was too polished for that, but if you knew what to look for, you could see it in the cracks. His jokes had a sharper edge, his eyes darted more. He flinched every time his phone buzzed. And then, on a gray Thursday afternoon, I got the response. Megan's reply was short. "Rachel, I don't know who you are or why you've sent me this, but I think we need to talk in person." My stomach flipped. I stared at her email for a full minute before responding. We agreed to meet the following evening at a small coffee shop near her office. I barely slept that night. When the moment finally came, I arrived 10 minutes early and picked a table near the back where we'd have some privacy. When she walked in, I recognized her instantly. Calm face, clean posture, the quiet intensity of someone who carried too much on her shoulders but refused to let anyone see the strain. She sat across from me, politely declined a drink, and placed both hands on the table like she was preparing for bad news. "You have 5 minutes," she said, her tone cool and composed. I didn't waste them. I told her everything, how he came to me in tears, begging for help to save his marriage, how I gave him $20,000 I had been saving for my first home, how a week later I saw the Tesla, the Instagram posts, the reimbursement attempt through the company. I showed her screenshots, photos, receipts, everything I had. She didn't say a word as she scrolled through them, her face unreadable, but I saw her fingers tremble. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. I knew he was hiding something, but I thought it was gambling, or maybe just another financial screw-up. Not this. She leaned back in her chair, blinking fast. He told me he was taking time off work to go to a leadership retreat. He said he was finally investing in himself, that he wanted to be a better man. She gave a bitter laugh. And I believed him. I didn't know what to say, so I stayed quiet. She scrolled to the final screenshot, the one with Cassidy kissing him in front of the Tesla, and let out a long exhale. You said he took 20 grand from you? I nodded. And tried to expense the same car through the company? I nodded again. You realize that's grounds for termination and possibly criminal charges, right? Yes, I said. I just didn't know what to do with it all. HR usually protects the people at the top, and I didn't want to go down with him. She met my gaze. You won't, not if you work with me. That was the moment it shifted. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about exposure, about dragging his lies into the light. She told me she would handle things from her end, personally and legally, and asked if I would be willing to send everything formally in a shared folder. I said yes, of course I said yes. The next few days moved fast. Megan wasn't idle. She filed for a legal separation and hired a forensic accountant. Meanwhile, I started noticing little ripples around the office, people whispering. More HR personnel walking past our floor than usual. Then I got a call from Anna, one of our junior analysts. She sounded nervous. Rachel, can I ask you something off the record? I said yes. She hesitated, then said, Did you ever give money to Andrew, like personally? My chest tightened. I asked why. She said he'd approached her 3 months ago, after hours, asking for a short-term bridge loan to help with a medical emergency. He said I was the only one he trusted, she said quietly. He made it sound so urgent, so personal. I gave him 5 grand. It felt like someone had poured ice water down my spine. I asked her if she had any proof. She sent me screenshots of the text conversation and the Venmo transaction. And that's when the full picture began to form. I wasn't the only one. I was just one in a line of women he'd targeted. I called 2 more colleagues I suspected might be involved, carefully, respectfully, and each of them admitted some version of the same thing. He'd cornered them in moments of vulnerability, spun elaborate stories, promised repayment, even framed it as a mentorship bond. By the end of the day, I had collected proof of over $45,000, 0 cents in personal loans he had solicited from female employees alone. He hadn't just scammed me, he'd built a whole side hustle on deception and charm right under the nose of the company, and no one said a word because everyone thought it was just them. That's the thing about being used. When you're isolated, it feels like you're shamed to carry, but when the pieces come together, you realize it was never about your weakness, it was about his pattern. I compiled everything, every screenshot, transaction, and statement. I created a comprehensive document labeled Andrew Miller, Internal Misconduct and Financial Abuse. I added it to the shared folder Megan and I had created and waited. On Monday morning, she forwarded it to the board. She didn't give him a heads up. She didn't offer him a chance to resign quietly. She went nuclear, and I stood behind her. By Tuesday, he was gone. Officially on leave, but no one believed that. His office was cleared out by end of day. HR sent a company-wide email thanking employees for their patience during a confidential ethics review. We all knew what that meant, but it wasn't over for me. Not yet. That same afternoon, I got a letter in the mail. A reimbursement check from Megan. Full amount. No note, no explanation. Just the check and a copy of the payment receipt. It was more than I expected, more than I even needed. But what mattered most wasn't the money, it was what came next. I wasn't just going to collect my refund and walk away. This man had stolen from me, disrespected me, and used my kindness to fund his double life. I wanted the world to know who he really was, and I had just the plan to make sure that happened. The day Andrew's office was cleared out, the atmosphere on our floor shifted from whispers to bold, almost celebratory tension. People didn't say much aloud, but their eyes said everything. A collective sense of relief lingered in the air, the kind you feel when the thing that's been rotting under the surface is finally removed. Still, I couldn't help feeling a strange detachment from it all. I wasn't just satisfied with seeing him gone. That wasn't enough. Not for what he'd done. Not just to me, but to every woman he'd manipulated, every rule he'd bent, every dollar he'd taken and redirected into lies. I wanted more than his resignation. I wanted consequences that stuck. And I knew No one would fight for that unless I did it myself. That night, I sat at my desk, lights dimmed, the glow of my laptop the only illumination in the room. I opened the shared folder I'd created with Megan and renamed it the dossier. I wanted it to feel formal, heavy, like evidence in a criminal case. Because to me, it was. I spent hours organizing the documents, putting everything in order, individual folders for each woman, labeled with a fake name and timestamped transactions, screenshots from Venmo, Zelle, and PayPal transfers with notes like, for the kids' emergency dentist, therapy session deposit, and business trip shortfall. The lies were almost creative in their cruelty, each one uniquely tailored to sound personal, urgent, and believable. That was his gift. He knew how to exploit your empathy like a tool. I added a folder titled Cassidy and filled it with social media posts, geotags, and timeline overlaps. I annotated each image with how it correlated to a financial request from one of us. The most damning? A post from Cassidy in front of a rooftop bar in Miami with the caption, "Surprise weekend escape. He said I needed to recharge. New man, new city, new me." The timestamp matched exactly to the day Andrew texted me, saying his wife had threatened to leave unless he made a financial sacrifice. He wasn't just using people. He was playing puppeteer with our bank accounts while flying his mistress around the country like some twisted executive fantasy. Then there were the expense reports. I hadn't realized how careless he had gotten until I started matching company documents to Cassidy's photos. A client dinner in LA that coincided with a photo of her at a sushi rooftop tagged with "my favorite chef." A hotel receipt labeled conference travel that appeared the same weekend Cassidy posted a boomerang of her twirling in a silk robe with the caption, "Heaven." All of it paid for with a mix of company money, borrowed funds, and our generosity. The man wasn't just morally bankrupt, he was a financial predator. I included one final folder, testimonies. In it were anonymized written statements from the women he had approached. Some were short, just a few lines saying he'd manipulated them into giving him money. Others were longer, emotional, raw. One in particular stayed with me. It was from a junior employee named Claire. "He made me feel like I was special," she wrote, "like he saw potential in me no one else had. I didn't even think of it as a loan, it felt like an investment in the connection. I'm ashamed to say I gave him money twice, once from my savings, once from a credit card. I didn't even tell my boyfriend. I read it twice, maybe 3 times before saving and closing the file. I'd been where she was. I knew exactly how it felt to trust someone in power, only to be made into a fool." By the end of the week, I submitted the full dossier to HR, the board, and the ethics department, copying Megan on every communication. I made sure it was clean, professional, bulletproof. I even included a cover page. Subject, pattern of manipulation, financial misconduct, and ethical violations. Andrew Miller. It was the most professional hit job I had ever orchestrated. The email went out at 7:59 a.m. on Monday morning. By 9:30, my inbox was flooded with responses. HR asked me to come in for a formal interview. The internal audit team wanted access to the original files. The board thanked me for my integrity and bravery. I didn't care about the compliments, I just wanted them to act. And they did. By Wednesday, an all-hands email announced that an external investigative firm had been contracted to perform a thorough review of recent executive conduct. A new policy was being rolled out. Personal loans between employees, even at different ranks, were now prohibited unless disclosed and documented. Mandatory ethics retraining sessions were scheduled. But what really caught everyone's attention was the quiet rumor, leaked from someone in accounting, that the company was preparing to pursue legal action against Andrew to recover misappropriated funds. I thought I'd feel elated, triumphant, but I didn't. What I felt was something closer to peace, a quiet, unshakable peace that came from knowing I had done something when it counted, that I hadn't just let it slide, that I hadn't told myself it's just money or it's not worth the trouble, because it was, not just for me, for all of us. Still, I wasn't finished. There was one last thing I needed to do. I opened Cassidy's Instagram again, which had since gone private, but the internet has a memory, screenshots live forever, and so did the pride she took in being the other woman. A quick search of her name brought me to her LinkedIn, which listed her as a brand ambassador and luxury lifestyle content creator. Her listed partners included 2 auto brands, a cosmetics line, and a real estate company. That gave me an idea. I compiled a clean little press kit, screenshots of her posts featuring the Tesla, dates tied to Andrew's company reimbursement requests, and a timeline showing when funds were siphoned from our accounts. I sent them anonymously to her sponsors. I didn't fabricate anything, I didn't add commentary, I let the timestamps and captions speak for themselves. I wasn't aiming to destroy her. I just wanted her to understand that being complicit in someone's lies makes you accountable for the fallout. A week later, her LinkedIn profile had been scrubbed. No more brand partnerships, no more Tesla pics, no more hashtags about queens, blessings, or new beginnings. And then came the final bitter cherry on top. One afternoon, I got a call from a blocked number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. I picked up and said, "Hello," silence at first. Then a voice I hadn't heard since his thank you text. "Rachel, it's Andrew." I said nothing. I just wanted to say, I never meant to hurt you. I didn't think it would go this far. You've ruined my career. I let that hang in the air. Then I said, "You ruined your own career." I just connected the dot. He breathed heavily for a moment. "You got your money back. Isn't that enough?" "No," I said, my voice calm. "Because I didn't lose just money. I lost sleep, confidence, trust. And I'm not the only one." He tried again. "You're not perfect either. You think you're so righteous, but you went behind my back. I hung up. That night I slept better than I had in months. Justice wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was a PDF file, a few well-timed emails, and silence at just the right moment. I didn't plan the moment of his undoing. It wasn't some perfectly timed revenge fantasy. But life has a strange way of offering opportunities when you least expect them, and when you're most ready to use them. The invitation came via email, Leadership Appreciation Dinner. It was an annual event our company hosted for executives, senior staff, and their guests. Andrew had always made a big show of it, boasting about his connections and charm, how he worked the room like it was his playground. The email said the event would be held at a luxury hotel ballroom downtown, black tie, spouses welcome, RSVP mandatory. I stared at the message for a long time, then clicked accept. I didn't know what would happen there, but something told me this dinner would be more than just small talk and overpriced wine. That week, the office buzzed with nervous energy. The investigation into Andrew's misconduct was still active, and everyone walked on eggshells. His name was no longer mentioned aloud, only whispered in hallways or exchanged in side glances during meetings. But the absence of answers was starting to wear on people. Some resented that there had been no formal announcement of his termination. Others were just waiting for the next scandal to drop. Meanwhile, I kept my head down, kept working, and quietly prepared. The day of the dinner, I took the afternoon off and went to get my hair done. Not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I wanted to walk into that ballroom with my head held high, looking like the exact opposite of the woman he had tried to manipulate. I wore a sleek black dress, minimal jewelry, and just enough makeup to look elegant without effort. As I stood in front of the mirror before leaving, I felt calm. No anger, no anxiety, just readiness. I wasn't going there to make a scene. I wasn't going to start a fight. I was going to tell the truth. And if that truth made people uncomfortable, that wasn't my problem anymore. The ballroom shimmered with warm light and money. Chandeliers hung like icy constellations, and soft jazz filtered through hidden speakers. Waiters passed trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres, and everyone tried to pretend the company wasn't in the middle of an ethics crisis. I recognized a few board members near the bar, deep in conversation, their expressions tight. Megan was already there, wearing a sharp navy dress, her posture as unshakable as ever. When she saw me, she nodded. That was all we needed. A shared glance, a silent agreement. Tonight, the truth would land where it needed to. Andrew showed up 20 minutes late. That was typical. He never arrived at anything without building anticipation first. But this time, there was no fanfare, no handshakes, no welcoming smiles, just eyes, watching, calculating, waiting. He wore his usual charm-like armor, pretending not to notice the shift in temperature. He moved through the room like nothing had changed, though his smile was tighter than usual and his hands stayed in his pockets, where no one could see them shake. Dinner was served at long tables draped in white linens. I was seated with Megan, two VPs, and a handful of department heads. Andrew sat at a table one row over, close enough that I could hear his forced laughter, far enough to avoid direct contact. The food was exquisite: seared scallops, filet mignon, delicate vegetables, arranged like art, but no one paid much attention. We were all waiting for the same thing: the speech. The CEO stood to speak, thanking everyone for their resilience during a time of introspection and organizational recalibration. He used phrases like ethical realignment and renewed values, the kind of corporate language that's vague enough to soothe shareholders, but pointed enough to spark curiosity. Then he said, "Before we move into the awards portion of the evening, I'd like to acknowledge the work of one particular employee whose quiet integrity and commitment to transparency have helped steer us toward accountability in recent weeks." My breath caught. He looked directly at me. "Rachel Porter, would you stand for a moment?" A ripple went through the room. I stood, heart pounding. Applause followed, unsure at first, then stronger. Some clapped because they genuinely supported me, others clapped because they sensed the shift in power. But Andrew didn't clap at all. He stared at his plate like it might save him. I sat back down as the CEO continued, praising a culture of responsibility, hinting at upcoming changes in leadership, and promising real consequences for those who violate our core principles. And then it happened. A large screen lit up behind the stage. At first, it displayed the company's logo and some basic visuals, a generic slideshow meant to accompany the awards, but Megan had worked closely with the AV team. They were ready. When the CEO gave the nod, the visuals changed. The screen now displayed a timeline, a simple, elegant slide titled Unreported Financial Activity and Internal Loan Requests. It started slow, just data points, transaction amounts, anonymized names. But then the slide changed to text messages, screenshots, dated and sourced: $5,000, 0 cents from Anna, $8, 0 cents from Claire, $20, 0 cents from me, and then the reimbursement requests, labeled client gift, business development travel, private coaching expenses, each rejected by accounting, each lining up perfectly with Cassidy's public social media trail. There were no names listed. No one had to say it. Everyone knew. Megan stepped onto the stage and took the mic. Calm, clear. This visual timeline represents a documented pattern of unethical behavior involving personal financial solicitation and misappropriation of company expense reporting. These findings, which were brought forward by courageous team members, reflect not only a betrayal of individual trust, but a breach of our collective ethics. This is what we're no longer willing to tolerate. Gasps and murmurs spread like wildfire. All eyes turned to Andrew. He stood up, slowly, tried to leave. A board member intercepted him. There was no shouting, no dramatics. Just a quiet conversation and a firm hand on his shoulder guiding him out. The room stayed silent, watching until he disappeared through the side doors. The rest of the night felt like a strange dream. People approached me with cautious gratitude. Some apologized for not seeing it sooner. Others confessed their own doubts, their own encounters with his manipulation. A few women, junior staff, interns, looked at me like I'd done something heroic. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like someone who'd been pushed too far and finally decided to push back. After dessert, Megan and I stepped out onto the balcony. The city buzzed beneath us, the night thick with humidity and the scent of expensive perfume. She turned to me. "You did it," she said. "You made sure he couldn't bury it." I nodded. "And you made sure it mattered." We stood in silence for a while, watching the traffic below. I thought about that first day when Andrew had walked into my office with fake tears and real lies. How small he'd made me feel, how easily he'd twisted my kindness into currency, and how I'd finally turned it back into something powerful. He used my money to buy silence. I used my voice to buy truth, and in the end, it was worth every penny. In the days following the dinner, the company descended into a strange, unspoken state of cleanup. There were no grand announcements, no emails with dramatic subject lines, but the effects were obvious. Andrew's name vanished from the internal systems. His biography was scrubbed from the website, his voicemail rerouted, and his old office remained dark and locked. The board moved swiftly. Word spread through back channels that the investigation had concluded with enough evidence to not only fire him with cause, but to pursue legal action for fraudulent activity. For the first time in a long time, it felt like justice wasn't just a concept people preached at team meetings. It was something alive, breathing, and moving through the hallways. The company filed a civil suit against Andrew for misappropriation of funds, breach of ethical standards, and violation of employee trust. His actions had exposed the company to risk, not just financial but reputational. Shareholders had started to ask questions, and the board needed a scapegoat. But for once, the scapegoat was the right one. Megan, now fully separated from him and handling her own public relations firm with twice the intensity, made sure that the story didn't vanish into silence. Discreetly, but efficiently, she leaked key findings from the investigation to a financial ethics watchdog blog, and within a week, a headline emerged: "Executive accused of exploiting female staff and misusing corporate funds. A culture reckoning in progress." The article didn't name him directly, but everyone in the industry knew exactly who it referred to. The details were too specific, the quotes too accurate. It spread across LinkedIn, Twitter, and internal forums like wildfire. Andrew tried to push back, of course. His lawyer filed a counterclaim accusing the company of defamation and mishandling of private information. But he underestimated just how meticulously the evidence had been curated. Every transaction, every text, every denied reimbursement was already documented, organized, and legally reviewed. His lawyer withdrew within days of seeing the full dossier. It wasn't just about bad optics anymore. He was staring down the barrel of potential criminal liability. HR issued an internal report detailing new safeguards, revised whistleblower policies, and a newly created ethics officer position. They credited unnamed employees for their bravery in coming forward. I didn't need my name on a plaque. I just wanted the people he hurt to feel seen, to know they weren't crazy, that it wasn't their fault. The company offered restitution to those of us who had lent him money. I was already reimbursed by Megan, but they insisted on a formal compensation package for what they termed extraordinary emotional and professional distress. I accepted, not out of greed, but as a form of closure. The check was sizable, more than I expected, more than I even felt comfortable receiving, but I knew what I'd do with it the moment I saw the number. I wasn't going to hoard it or spend it on something flashy. I was going to reclaim what I had sacrificed. That weekend, I met with a real estate agent and placed a down payment on a condo I'd been eyeing for nearly 2 years. Clean, modest, filled with light. It wasn't about the square footage. It was about the door I would walk through at the end of each day, knowing that no one else had taken it from me. Meanwhile, Andrew faded from public view. Cassidy's social media disappeared entirely. She had deleted her accounts, gone offline, vanished into the shadows of a public fallout she clearly hadn't seen coming. Rumors circulated that she had returned to her hometown embarrassed and broke. A friend of a friend mentioned that she'd applied for a job at a mid-tier marketing firm but didn't make it past the background check. I didn't smile at that news. I didn't gloat. She was never the core problem, she was a symptom of it, a shiny object used to mask rot. Still, I felt no obligation to forgive her. She stood by him, benefited from his lies, flaunted luxuries, paid for by other people's trust. That silence, that complicity, had its price. One afternoon, weeks after the dinner, I received a small, unexpected package in the mail, no return address. Inside was a leather-bound notebook with my initials embossed on the front. Tucked inside was a handwritten note. "You turned everything I tried to hide into something no one could ignore. For that you have my respect, even if I no longer have anything else. A." I held the notebook in my hands for a moment, debating whether to throw it out, burn it, or keep it. Eventually, I slid it into the back of my bookshelf, a relic of a war I didn't start but was forced to finish. But the most unexpected moment of all came 2 months after the ethics report was finalized. Our CEO pulled me into a meeting with the head of HR and the board's legal advisor. I assumed it was about some lingering detail, maybe a final signature on a report. But what they offered was something else entirely. "We'd like to invite you to take on the newly created role of Senior Ethics and Culture Advisor," the CEO said. "Your actions led to real change here. We believe you're exactly the kind of person who can ensure this never happens again." I blinked, stunned. I hadn't been angling for a promotion. I hadn't even considered the possibility. But suddenly, it all made sense. The late nights, the stress, the humiliation, none of it had been for nothing. They weren't just handing me a title. They were handing me a platform to make sure women like me never had to go through what I did. I accepted the role, quietly, without a speech or social media post. I just changed the title on my email signature and got to work. My first week in the role, I launched a mentorship program for junior employees, focused on identifying manipulative workplace behaviors, understanding financial boundaries, and building professional confidence. Within a month, every session was fully booked. The emails I received afterward were overwhelming. One said, "I didn't even know what happened to me until I heard your story. Thank you for naming it." Another simply read, "You made me feel less alone." The irony wasn't lost on me. Andrew had always said I was too soft for leadership, too emotional, not strategic enough. He said I should smile more in meetings, that I needed to learn how to play the game. What he didn't understand, what people like him never seem to understand, is that kindness is not weakness, trust is not foolishness, and silence is not compliance. Sometimes it just takes time for the right voice to speak. I walked past his old office one evening, long after the sun had set and most of the staff had gone home. The door was still locked, the nameplate gone, the room empty. But in that quiet space, I felt no ghosts, no bitterness, just clarity. I hadn't just survived him. I had dismantled him, brick by brick, lie by lie. Not out of vengeance, but out of necessity, because if I hadn't, someone else would have been next. What goes around doesn't always come back quickly. But when it does, it lands exactly where it belongs. 6 months later, I found myself standing outside a Tesla showroom, not by design, but by coincidence. I had taken a walk on my lunch break, letting my feet guide me instead of a destination, and somehow ended up here, staring through the polished glass at the same model of car that had once triggered a chain of betrayal and humiliation in my life. The same model, the same pearlescent white paint, sleek and polished and perfectly silent behind the window. I stood there for a while, watching the sales associate talk animatedly to a young couple inside. They looked happy. Naive, maybe, but happy. I didn't feel anger or bitterness anymore. I didn't think about Cassidy or about the Instagram photos or about the way I had sat on my couch that night, realizing how easily I had been lied to. I thought about how far I had come since that moment. I thought about the way I stood up and refused to stay silent, how I had turned humiliation into something useful, even powerful. Back then, I gave someone the benefit of the doubt because I believed in integrity, in second chances, in helping people when they say they're desperate. That part of me hadn't changed. I still believed in compassion. I still believed in giving people room to be human. But now, I also believed in accountability, in boundaries, in the value of my own damn money, time, and trust. The woman I was then, sitting in that office, listening to his rehearsed tears and handing over $20,000, was still inside me. But she had learned to speak up, to say no, to demand better, and she had left the door open for something much stronger to grow. I walked away from the glass and down the street toward my new condo. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, bought with money I earned, saved, and reclaimed. It had clean white walls, big windows, and a quiet reading nook by the balcony that I used every morning without fail. Sometimes I'd think about Andrew's voice in my head, telling me I was too sensitive or not business-minded enough. And then I'd look at the messages I still received from employees, especially younger women, who told me how my story helped them find their voice, how they'd left toxic teams, reported unethical managers, walked out of manipulative meetings with their heads higher than they ever thought possible. That was the legacy I cared about, not the job title or the office corner or the performance reviews. The impact, the reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the one paying the most attention, and sometimes the one building the strongest case. On the 1-year anniversary of that fateful wire transfer, I got a package in the mail from Megan. No note, just a small framed photo. It was from the company's Women in Leadership event we'd hosted a month earlier. I stood at the podium, microphone in hand, smiling slightly as I addressed the crowd. The caption, etched onto the frame, read, "You turned silence into change." I placed it on my shelf next to my new business cards and the ethics handbook I had helped rewrite. I didn't need revenge anymore. What I needed, what I had earned, was peace, clarity, and the satisfaction of knowing I hadn't let someone reduce me to a footnote in their mistakes. I used to replay everything in my head, wondering what I could have done differently. Now, I understood that my mistake hadn't been in trusting someone, it had been in staying silent when that trust was broken. That part was over now. That chapter closed. And what came after was mine to write, on my terms, in my voice, for no one else's approval. I passed the Tesla showroom again a few days later, but I didn't stop. I didn't need to. I already had everything I